Hey everyone, I'd like to go over the EVAAS activity that we did in class today. If you remember, on each of these rows, we have a student. So there are students numbered 1 through 81. In your data for your school, you'd have their names, but here it's de-identified. We have the biological sex of those students, just being male or female. We have a race variable. We have their grade. They're all in 7th grade. We have their AIGEL and disability status. And then we have this projected state percentile and their actual percentage. So what did we think they were going to do based, and then how did they do on the actual test? So the only thing I want to do before we get started is just to create that difference, because I think it's very interesting. So remember, we'll use the equal sign to start a formula. We'll click their actual percentage and subtract their projected percentage. Okay, and then Google here says, do you want me to do that for everyone? And I just hit that green X and it does it for all of them. So we could see that some students did a little worse than projected, but others did, like this first student, quite a bit better. Okay, so now that we have those, the goal will be to create a series of pivot tables that give us information by, if we look here on this second sheet that I just clicked on, pivot tables, we want to look at their EVAAS projections and actual, how they actually did by sex, by race, ethnicity, by AIG, by EL, and by student with disability status. Okay. So what I'm going to do it for this first one in detail and maybe the second one, and then I'll speed up the video and do it because the process repeats itself for each. All right, but I want to start with this by sex. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my data sheet and I'll select everything from A through J, A1 through J, and it looks like it's going to be 82 here. Okay. Having selected that, remember we use this data drop-down menu and we go down to pivot table. And now Google's asking us, well, where do you want to put it? I'm going to put it in this existing sheet of pivot table. So what I do is I click on the pivot table, I'll click in this box, I'll select this A2 and click OK and create it. Okay. So now the pivot table is asking me, well, what do you want to put on my rows? So I'm going to go ahead and do sex and it should populate. So we have females and males. And then what values do we want to add? Well, first, I'd love to know their projected, the average projected state percentile for EVAAS. So what percentile are they projected to have? And you can see that our females are a little bit lower than our males, but they're both right around 30th in the 30th percentile. Okay, then we're going to add a column. I want to add actually what they did, their actual percentage, and switch that sum to average again. And having done that, we can see how they really did. So again, females performing a little bit lower than males, but projected a lot higher. Their actual percentages were a lot higher than what they were projected to be by the formula. But then we want to know numbers, right? I want to know how many males and females I have in the school. So I'll add one more value column. And to do that, you'll just select the same variable. So I'll select this sex variable again, and that'll give us the count. Okay. So now we have, if we, the decimals are a little funny here, so we can shrink them down. And notice we have this projected of average projected of 30 and 32 for females and males. They actually scored 51 and 57 was the average. And there were 46 females in this and 35 males. So quite a bit fewer males in this 7th grade class. And then of course we get their averages. All right. Now, the one thing I didn't include, but I would like to, is that difference column, right? Like, well, what is the average difference between the males and females based on whether or not what they actually got versus their projection? So to do that, I can just add it in. If I'm, this is still pulled up, I can add a values and I'm going to add this difference column and I want to add the average difference here. Okay, now notice it put it on the end. I can move this tile up and it'll push it over. So I think that's kind of a little bit nicer. But you can see the average difference between the actual and the projected and it creates that difference here. And then if we'd like to, we can, of course, change the decimal plates, make them a little bit smaller. Okay. So that's a nice table. We can see that a little bit difference by our sex here, but not big differences. Now, the difference between what they actually scored and what they were projected to score are, in fact, quite large. So let's now do it one more time. I'll do one more example with race ethnicity, and then I'll do the other ones without talking. We'll just kind of speed it up. And so you can check your answers at the end. Okay. So for EVAAS, I'll go through the same process. I'm going to click back on this data tab. The data I want's already selected. So I'll select this data window and click pivot table. I'd like to go to an existing sheet. That existing sheet will be right here on A8. So I'll click in that box there and tell it to do A8 and create it. Okay, on my rows this time, I'd like to do race. Okay, and you can see it's Black, Hispanic, multiracial, and white seem to be the indicators I have. And then I'll add those same values. So I'll start with their projected state percentile and change that to average. I'm going to add another one of their actual percentage and change that to average. And then I'm going to add another one of this difference and change that one to average. And finally, this last column, I'd like to know how many students I have in each of my subgroups, because that really matters when we're looking at these averages that seem to be quite different. I want to know how many are in each. So I'll add that at the end. And remember, you just select the same variable. So it's going to be that race variable. And then Google populates that. So I'm going to do some quick formatting here and get the decimal places all the same. All right. And then having done that, there we go. Let's see what we find. So notice we have 64 of our 7th graders are identified as Black or African American, and they score an average. Their projected percentile was 28th percentile, but they scored in the 49th percentile, and that difference was 20.7. Okay, and then notice our other subgroups, our Hispanic students perform a lot higher. Notice their average achievement was 80. They do quite a bit better than was projected for them. There was only 7 of those students, and we only have 2 multiracial and 8 white students. So again, it's all context. In this 7th grade class, the majority of our students here are Black or African American. And so having these averages and looking at subgroups might be a little misleading here in that the other subgroups are a little bit smaller. So it's all context. This is just one table among all the other data that you might look at. Okay, so that's another example. I'm going to go ahead and just finish these off so you have it. You can see it. I'll speed this up so it goes really fast. But then at the end, you can check your results to see if you got the same ones that I did. Okay, so I finished each one of those tables. Of course, we could change names within here. If they're too long, you can, reformat the tables as you'd like. But notice we only have 2 AIG students. We have 3 EL students, and we have 9 students with disabilities. So while these averages, you could look at EL in particular, on average, they're doing a lot better than non-EL. It's just those 3 students that are driving that. And of course, AIG, you'd expect a higher projected percent. Their achievement is near 100, right? They do great. And that's that average difference. So context matters, number of students matters, but these are really informative tables that you might be able to build with your own EVAAS data. So I hope you found this exercise helpful.